So for those in the audience who don't know who Kasey is, which I don't know how that's possible, but things happen. Kasey is a seasoned marketer with over 15 years of experience, having worked in global marketing roles for brands like Solo Cup. Maybe you've heard the song by, Red Solo Cup, Virgin Mobile, and Great Clips. Kasey brings a wealth of expertise in both business to business and business to consumer marketing strategies. Kasey, take it away. I'll be your man in the chair and hit the button for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matthew, for the introduction. And hello, everybody. Looking forward to this. It's going to be a great one where we're bringing marketing and technology together, an ever increasing partnership between the two departments. So let's kick off with our two esteemed guests. The first one is Erich Johnston from Empower Brands. Erich, if you want to give a quick overview, background of yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kasey. So I'm the Franchise Technology Solutions Manager here at Empower Brands. We are a franchisor with 10 different brands. 8 of those are home services concepts. The other 2 are B2B. My team is responsible for basically helping those new investors with everything from the time they license their territory to the time they divest their business. So anything that's technology related, my team's here to support them along the way.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Erich. And then Matthew, if you go to the next slide here. The next one, I love this one. This guy's a rock star, literally a rock star, it looks like. John Keene from ServiceMinder. Thanks for joining us, John. If you want to give a overview of your background and then what kind of guitar you play there.
That happens to be a Paul Reed Smith Swamp Ash Special 25th edition. But I'm only a rock star if you qualify being able to cover my bar tab. So luckily, I spend more of my time on the software side. So ServiceMinder is a platform for managing operating home services brands. And so that's kind of the whole, from the lead coming in until the royalties get paid in the back end, right? We kind of facilitate that whole process, allow brands to manage and instrument and report on all of that data, as well as enforcing consistency. And then a big part of what we do, obviously, is help our franchisees and the brands also support, their client experience needs for their clients. So that's kind of what we do. We've been at it since 2012. So we almost got it figured out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So let's take a look at the agenda here. Again, this ever increasing partnership between the marketing CMO role and the CTO role continues to grow and grow. And brands that are able to leverage that partnership are the brands that are succeeding and are going to succeed in the future. So we have a great agenda here around managing and building out that customer experience, that journey for your customer, and how tech stack can impact, or more importantly, how it can hurt that experience. So here are the 5 topics that we'll dive into. I won't read over them here. We'll dive into them in depth here. So let's kick it off, and we'll kick it off with Erich, since I introduced you first. Erich, this first topic is talking about how we can identify whether or not our brand's customer experience is succeeding, or if there are enhancements that we need to be making. So, what do you look at in your organization around whether or not that customer experience is a positive experience for your customers and prospects? Or more importantly, how do you know that there needs to be changes or enhancements?
So I'll go back to the last session. I know Dan had brought up the importance of working with your franchisees, making sure that there's a revolving door of communication back and forth. A lot of times those guys are going to raise the red flags when something's wrong, or they're going to tell you when something's going really well. So just stay in communication with the franchisees when you're making those decisions. From a day-to-day, we track some KPIs for all the brands here. The big ones for us are speed to lead. So how quickly are we getting to our new leads? Lead to appointment ratios. So of those leads, who are we qualifying and actually booking appointments with? Appointment to sale. So once we get on site, how are we doing to close sales? And then we start looking at things like customer retention, lifetime value, client churn rates. So if they're canceling service with us, why? Are they going to another provider? Why? And then for some of our more like project-based brands that are not so service-based, we dig more into the customer journey and the sales funnel just to kind of determine what's going well, where things might be bogging down in the process, and where the opportunities to improve are.
Eric, you have a portfolio of brands, and I'm assuming that, your franchisee base is pretty wide, from new startup, maybe smaller from a revenue perspective, to, the opposite, where they're mature, larger revenue, larger teams. How do you manage, when you're either introducing a new technology or a new platform, or you're looking at upgrades? How do you manage sort of accommodating that breadth of experience, we'll call it, from your brands and your franchisees, across the single brand, but then across your portfolio brands? What's that process look like?
So in addition to having, within the same brand, we've got folks who have been in business for 30 years. We've also got brands that have been around for 35 years and some brands that have been around for 6 months. So the conversation's a little bit different depending on the audience you're talking with. But for those well-established brands, we try and get folks from all walks of that kind of tenure. So we've got our experienced guys that are doing really well. They're helping the middle guys kind of figure out how to get over that hump. And then everybody's geared towards the new guys. How do we get the brand new franchisees ramped up so that they're contributing to the brand the same way that our other locations are? So I think our experienced guys, for the most part, they've got it figured out. They've helped us figure it out, and they have a really good eye towards what does a new franchisee need to succeed in this model. So we really rely on them.
Perfect. John, what's your feedback? What's your viewpoint on ensuring that technology is running smoothly, it's bringing efficiencies, it's helping grow the business, and then what are some early indicators that you may need to pivot or evolve a little bit?
Yeah, one of the big things we talk about from a client experience perspective is every brand at a base, but also just even within every industry, the client experience that the consumers are expecting is completely different, right? Especially if you're B2B versus B2C. But even within the B2C space, if you're kind of on the retail side, right, that client experience is going to look very different than if you're coming to somebody's home to perform some kind of service, right? If you need to go inside. And so, we tend to, obviously we focus on the home services side. And so what we try to focus on is what does that consumer expect, right? And to a certain extent, it's almost like you want to tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, tell them, and then repeat. You can almost not communicate too much to the consumer so that they know what to expect. And so then if you kind of follow that model, then where does your tech stack help you or hurt you, right? Does it enable all those communication touch points that you want to do? Are there new touch points that you want to add or enable? And does your technology solution allow you to do that? Some of the red flags to look for early on is obviously adoption, right? Are people using the tool? Are they turning it on? Are they letting it do its thing? But then secondly, how much manual process does it take to get things done? Like what's the recipe for a franchisee or someone who works for the franchisee to turn that part of the crank, right? If it involves them manually placing outbound phone calls or going over to a texting solution or, kind of manually copying and pasting data from one thing to another, then those are all things to look at in terms of, eliminating that friction, eliminating that manual process, because anytime you introduce that, that's where the adoption goes down. People will just not do it because they don't have time. So automation is definitely a big part of enhancing, and then manual effort is definitely something that can be a detriment.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I think is interesting, and you talked about kind of the customer's expectations. So I'll throw this back to you, John, and then also I'd like Eric's feedback on this. How do you balance the customer feedback and the customer expectations versus franchisee feedback and expectations on how they may think or feel they want the process or experience to be? How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, part of it goes back to, it's a franchise. So to a certain extent, the client experience, will oftentimes be kind of, I don't want to say dictated or mandated, right? But is at least designed by the brand to be consistent, right? Because if you walk into, franchisee A and go through their client experience versus franchisee B, as a consumer, you're expecting those to be consistent, right? So if they're vastly different, then in that case, I think maybe the brand wins and the franchisee doesn't win as much, right? But in terms of balancing what the client's looking for, I mean, you really have to look at, I mean, I would say to franchisees, like, what if you're the consumer of your service? What would you want, right? Would you want to know they're coming tomorrow? And would you like a time frame? Would you like to know that they're on the way? Would you like, a place to leave some feedback or whatever, right? If you as a consumer expect that for your other vendors, then your customers probably want the same thing from you.
Eric, any feedback, anything from your end on that?
Yeah, and I think it kind of leads into the next discussion point here on the agenda, but know who your clients are. So, I mean, we have our idea of who the clients are at the franchisor level. Our franchisees are close to their clients and they know what it's like in their market. But invest in some market research, figure out what your client personas are out there, who's actually buying from you guys. And yeah, take everybody's input correctly and then talk about that together, make sure that they're all aligned.
Yeah, that is a very interesting. I remember when I was at Great Clips and we were launching our online check-in app. I had the marketing folks and me sitting on the marketing side of it. It was a kind of a difficult position to be in, where franchisees and our marketing team was like, "Oh, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this," right? And I had to go back to them and say, "Remember what our original intent with this was. If we start adding functionality off the get-go, right, we're not going to achieve what the goal of this is. Let's build it, let's launch it, and then enhance it from there." But initially, it's not a marketing tool for us today. So, John, we'll go back to you. What is that magic formula? I think if we have the magic formula, I think we'd all be wealthy and retired on a beach somewhere. But
we wouldn't be having this call.
Yeah. What are some of those elements of building from success and ensuring that you have, whether it's in building out the roadmap and the go-to-market strategy, or the enhancement, updating functionality of a tech stack?
Yeah, I think Eric kind of touched on this a couple of times, and that is it's kind of know your customer, right? Whether the customer is the franchisee or the customer is the clients of the franchisees. You have to start with kind of what is the expectations at both of those levels. And then once you have that, then you want to go and evaluate, how well are you able to execute on those expectations, right? So if it's a communication strategy or a reporting strategy or an analytics solution or whatever, do you have are you capturing the data you need to be able to do that? And then B, do you have the technology to execute it? For example, if your process is going to use text messaging to notify customers, do you have the ability to text or not? And so as you kind of run through those and make sure you have the things, then that's probably step 2. And then the third piece of that is then part of the formula is, again, to kind of measure, right? So measure engagement, measure utilization, measure what consumers or the clients do with those interactions. Do they respond? Are those within?
You froze there.
Eric first and go back.
All right, perfect. Eric, when you're looking at whether or not your tech stack's bringing the efficiency and the growth and the value that you're looking to achieve, how do you define what that success is? And then again, how do you ensure with the breadth of the brands and the breadth of the stakeholders that you remain true to that original intent, so you do set yourself up for success?
Yeah, I think when you're picking the tools that you guys are going to implement across the franchise system, is make sure it's something that you can keep consistent. You don't need people going off into left field and selling a Whopper when we're slinging Big Macs, right? So that piece of it's important to us. Knowing that you're tracking the data and that you're able to have that data output on the other side so you guys can monitor the success of things is important to us as well. But just knowing where you're at today with your current client experience and the customer journey. So at least once every other year with each brand, we like to kind of map that out, whether it's in a big room with all the franchisees together on poster boards, or if it's in a smaller group like a advisory council. It's kind of walk through the customer journey and all the automations and all the manual intervention that we have out there. Once we kind of understand where we're at today with something, we can start attributing some emotions that we'll put those on the client. But when you get to this point, maybe they're starting to feel a little nervous about making a decision. What can we do to inject a new tool or a new process into that client journey when they start to have the negative emotions? How can that kind of help us define what the enhancements need to be to the tech stack?
When you do you have Eric, do you guys have a technology board, an innovation committee, or anything like that with your franchisees of, again, pushing it back on them, right? Because, from the franchisor standpoint, right, we can talk about anything that we want to talk about, but it's a lot more impactful when it's coming from a franchisee to a franchisee. So do you guys have a technology committee or an innovation committee or anything that you guys lean on? Or is that always driven from the franchisor perspective?
So we do, and it's less of a committee, a standing committee, and more of a task force where we have our advisory councils who are, the 7 or 8 franchisees that have been voted in by their peers and by the brand team. We kind of let the issues bubble up and get filtered out through that group. And then once the brand team, the FAC is aligned on what the priorities are, then we'll kick off a specific task force to go and solve that issue. So it's just, for us, it's been more productive to kind of hyper focus on those meetings, set a deadline, set a goal, and work through it that way, as opposed to just have this open-ended task force that meets every other month and talks about whatever's kind of hot button.
Okay, perfect. Let's go to the next slide, Matthew, here. So the $1 million question, what does success look like, right? I think, everybody would agree that we can measure whatever we want to measure. The amount of data that we can collect is pretty vast. But how do we know that we're measuring the right thing? And then how do we communicate that success? So Eric, we'll turn it back to you and then go over to John. And again, it's a broad question, but how are you looking at success and how are you defining success right now?
Success is we're making a lot of money, right? Right. We got people buying into the brand. People are selling their businesses for a good return on their investment over their tenure of the business. But really, looking back to see the success of the tools are they being adopted, right? So what's the utilization of those tools? Are we overcomplicating things, or maybe we just missed the mark on what we were trying to solve and how we were solving it? Yeah, and then just the regular KPIs that we're tracking, making sure everybody knows what the data points going into a profile are and how that's going to be used on the back end, so we can monitor success of new initiatives, figure out what the baseline is and what kind of growth we're expecting to see or kind of metrics we want to see on the other end.
How do you balance that success with the customer experience? So, let's say there's an existing technology in place that, again, is driving, the desired results, at least from the franchisor's viewpoint, but you have feedback from the franchisees of, hey, we need to add this, we need to pivot here, we need to bring in this. How do you kind of balance those two potential counterpoints?
So a lot of times we'll take, an idea from the franchise system or even from somebody here at the franchisor side and, create a pilot group, a smaller focus group that you can implement out there and see if you're getting traction on that side of things before you decide to, upend somebody's season with this new initiative when they're in the middle of summer and their busy season. So we always try and roll out new initiatives for the brand when things are slowing down. A lot of our, home services businesses are very seasonal. So between November and February is like our time to actually implement, train, get some feedback, get stuff rolled back out. And then once we get into March, kind of people stop engaging with the newer initiatives that are out there in the system and they just want to run their business and get through the day. And then next fall, we'll talk about it again.
Perfect. John, your brand there, right? Are people showing up? Are they doing the job? Are they getting paid? Is the communication working? On the surface, it might sound pretty straightforward on what, the metrics of success would be for ServiceMinder, but, how do you, define and communicate what success looks like on your end?
Yeah, I think what we try to communicate to franchisors and franchisees as well is one of the key things to measure is, are the franchisees making more money as well, right? So you need to not only deal with top line revenue, right? Are their revenues growing? That obviously has an indirect effect for the brand because that drives royalties for most brands. But step one is, are the tools helping the franchisees, produce more revenue? And then the second side of the equation is it helping them, operate more efficiently, right? Are they making more money, right? And a lot of times franchisees almost care more about that than the top line. But the key metrics there have to derive, is the product cost effective or is the solution cost effective? If it introduces a bunch of manual effort, then that's expensive, right? So you have to kind of balance. Does it help eliminate manual effort for something they did before, or does it help them do something that they have to do more efficiently, or does it help drive top line revenue? And if it does those things for the franchisees, then as long as it meets the brand's requirements as well, then I think you have you can call it a success.
With, again, the difference between a new beginning franchisee or a franchisor, a young franchisor, John, in your instance, versus mature franchisor model. Is there any difference or variation, at least in the beginning and the onboarding, that you see of, yeah, we want to drive top line revenue for the organization. Let's not maybe focus on profitability today. We got to get there. We got to walk before we run. How do you manage those sort of expectations? And how do you, define success for the variance of, the maturity of the brand itself?
Yeah, I think, brands that are just getting started, or even franchisees that are just getting started, there's almost a limitless palette of choices of things to go do. And so I think for the early ones that are getting started, you want to focus on the core things, right? Get new leads, book appointments, generate invoicing, so that you can kind of test out those core processes. And once, franchisees, especially new franchisees, can only learn so many things at once, right? They can't learn the entire brand top to bottom in the first 6 months. So, especially when you're onboarding new franchisees, the technology may have a lot more capabilities to do things that maybe you don't show them early on, right? So that they can focus on the core things, right? So whatever those core business functions are, like, kind of the basics of the factory, right? Like leads come in, money comes in at the end, right? And then as they become more mature and more familiar with both the business processes and just the franchise system in general, then you can start adding on these new things. And then the last piece then is, as they get more mature in their space, they're then able to do more peer group stuff, right? They're able to work with other franchisees to find out what they're doing to help them. And I think that's a key market dynamic on the franchise side, where don't underestimate the value of asking your peers how they're using the tool and how it's helping them. And obviously the brand is doing that as well, but maybe with a different lens, right? So those are all ways to kind of measure the overall success and speed up the startup process, right? Don't walk in on day one and say, okay, great, it's an automated business, let's automate everything, and then we'll go home on Monday at 5, right? It's start small and add on as your competencies grow.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Matthew, let's go to the next question here. We're getting close to the end here. Best practices. John, you mentioned a little bit about that peer performance, peer groups. How would you, if you had to, list, top 2 or 3, best practices, what does that look like from your end? And then what value do you see in comparing your brand to another brand, either within the space or within a different vertical?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, just because we're a platform that tries to automate things, a big part of what we talk about is, the benefits of automation, right? Which is to eliminate manual processes, right? So one of your best practices for evaluating your current technology stack is looking at, all that manual effort and friction, right? So how many man hours a week do you burn, downloading stuff in Excel, uploading it somewhere else, versus if the tool could do a thing and you had a checkbox for it or whatever, right? That just happens automatically. How many steps in your process do you have to hand off to somebody else to go do? So that's usually one of the first things we look at from a kind of a measurement perspective. Because again, if it's manual, then either A, somebody's not going to show up one day, or B, they're going to forget the step, or they're going to fall behind. And so the process is going to break down because it requires, people to do specific things. You want to try to enable automation as much as possible to eliminate those faults.
Wonderful, thank you. Eric, what would be, if you had to pick out 2 or 3 kind of key points or recommendations to other franchisees in the space to bring efficiency and successful technology into an organization, what are some of those best practices that you would recommend to others?
Definitely having a peer group, like John said. Empower Brands being the company that it is, we've got those 8 residential brands that are pretty well represented across the major markets. We try and connect those owners up front, right? So an owner of Architect who's been in business for 15 years is now getting a new Wallaby location that's opening down the street from them, making sure that they're starting to build those relationships up front. And not just with the other Empower Brand sister companies, but the folks that are in those BNI networks as well, just kind of working with the existing locations.
Perfect. And then last question here, and Matthew and Dario, we're going to run a little bit over, but I trust that you'll give me 1 or 2 more minutes here.
2.
How do we know if what we're doing is if we're maximizing what we need to be doing, or if we need to be kind of digging a little deeper? Eric, we'll kick off with you for this one. And then again, it'd be great if you had any hurdles that you experience with your multiple brands there. But how do you know if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, or if, hey, we need to get a little bit deeper and a little bit more tighter on some of our actions?
Yeah. So we get, pretty bogged down in the minutia of whatever initiative or customer journey or client experience is for the brand. So it's nice for us every month we have a, confirmation day, discovery day, E-day, where I get to sit in a room and kind of talk through with a brand new set of eyes what the customer journey looks like, what the main data points are, what kind of reporting we're looking at on the back end of things. So it's nice to see the reaction of somebody across the table who's heard nothing about the brand. And if they're able to follow along with me and ask some engaging questions, to me, that means like, all right, it's clicking, we're on the right path here. On the other side of things, the red flags for us is engagement, right? So if it's not resonating with our owners or their teams, then we've either missed the mark on what we're trying to solve and how we're solving it. Maybe we've overcomplicated the solution, or we've just failed to get the proper input and buy-in from our advisory councils and our franchisees.
Wonderful. John, on your end, when you're implementing some of your platform within some of these brands, is simple bad? Is sometimes, making it basic and simple okay? And then, how do you know if you are kind of overstepping sort of that comfort efficiency standpoint when, you're bringing on applications and functionality into the platform?
Yeah, simple is good as long as you're able to do what you need to do, right? You kind of want the simplest thing that does what you want to do, but also don't forget that there are things you may want to do later. You want to make sure you're not kind of boxed in and don't have any room for growth. So from a user experience, from a process perspective, you want it simple, but from a kind of a tooling perspective, you want kind of a rich technology base to draw from so that you can kind of solve problems you haven't thought about. One of the things I would kind of highlight in terms of the overall process to implement technology, is we've said a lot of things here, and a lot of it sounds pretty basic. You just have a group, you have a meeting, you make a decision, and then it just magically happens. There's a lot of work that goes into rolling out, big systems. You have to deal with data migrations, or if you're rolling out a new communications strategy, somebody has to go design all those messages, all those communications, right? So what are you going to send to consumers? What is it going to say? Never underestimate and don't under budget the amount of time it takes to kind of go through all of those steps in the client experience, because somebody's going to have to look at every single one of those to decide, we want it to say this or we want it to say that. Is this on brand or is this off brand? And those are all things that I think people kind of inherently, when they get excited about moving forward, kind of overlook some of the effort that's required for some of those things. So that's kind of my red flag is if you think it's going to go super easy, make sure you think through the whole steps and what all you have to do to make it roll out.
Perfect. Last question here before I turn it back over to Matthew to do his thing here. Since, CMO Pure Talks, a lot of marketers, in the group and on the call here. John and Eric, if you had one piece of advice of a marketer working with technology to make sure that relationship is impactful, what would that be? John, we'll start with you.
I would say focus on kind of the data journey, right? So you want it to kind of flow as seamlessly as possible from, that first ad impression or that first direct mail postcard or from that first, phone call or coupon interaction all the way through to the end result, which is, revenue to the bottom line. You want to be able to kind of trace and audit that all the way through to verify that you can measure the levers and make the changes that you want to make.
Perfect. Wonderful. Eric?
Yeah, I would echo that. Same. Make sure, as a marketer, you're working with your your tech folk, your vendors out there in the world. They understand what the output is you're looking for, so you can monitor these things, making sure that the data is flowing through correctly, so you have that on the back end.
Wonderful. Well, this has been great. Matthew, I'll turn it back over to you. I don't know if we have time or questions coming in, or if you want to say anything to wrap it up here.
No, the main thing I want to say to you gentlemen is thank you. I hope that everybody in the audience enjoyed it. If you guys did have any questions, we do have the next session bumped right up to here. So I just ask that you guys go ahead and scan to get in contact with any of these fine gentlemen. It was I have tons of notes and I'm going to be digesting for a while here. One little one thought on what John was saying with always planning, if you're going to implement a system, the devil's always in the details with those things.